A few months ago, the series The Deep End came out about Teal Swan. And it seems like Teal Swan is always surrounded by controversy, but if you followed her loosely like I did, you might not know anything about it or have just only heard her side of things. But the Teal Swan rabbit hole goes deep, and it leaves me asking questions about a lot of things that I want to share with you today. First of all, welcome back to another video. I'm Annie, your Silicon Valley sage sister, who bring consciousness to the forefront of your daily life to make life a little kinder and simpler. Now, several months ago, the series The Deep End came out, and at the time, I ended up making 3 videos, of which I only really intended it to be one, and I feel like in the process of making the other 2 videos, my original intention sort of got lost in the sauce. So I've decided to archive those videos and instead put this one up so that I can have the integrity of my original intention existing in this space we call the internets, because we are all human, and I got lost in the sauce. I made the mistake of making those videos in the moment rather than sitting in the information, and I made the mistake of just not collecting my thoughts first before I put it out. And honestly, part of that was in a human ego moment to want to use it as a way to get seen. But at this point, I feel like, and I've always really felt like, it's more important to be asking these questions than anything else. So I want to correct the mistake that I made by having this video in place of the 3 others. So, when it comes to Teal Swan, there are 3 main controversies, and I want to talk about those because they sort of overarch my main concern, even though they're not my main concern. And then I want to share with you guys what is my main concern when it comes to her deeper teachings. So, and I've got my notes. There are 3 main points, 2 of which the Deep End get into when it comes to controversy that surrounds Teal Swan. The first one is whether or not she's a cult leader. And even the private investigator that her team hired said that there were things that ticked the boxes of cult behavior going on in her inner circle. Now, you're not going to encounter any of this in her outer teachings, in her outer circle, because everything that's in what your average person following her is going to see is going to be those general spiritual teachings. When you start getting deeper into things like her personal retreats that she holds, you start to see, especially in the Deep End, this cult-like behavior starting to happen. Things like people changing their name, and I'm not saying any of this is her intention. I want to get that clear right from the beginning. I believe that her intentions, at least the ones that she's conscious of, are pure in that sense. I think that she is so, as the private investigator says, trapped in a prison of her own making, where she's constantly doing these things that are survival mechanisms for her that end up being like cult-like behavior. And so it's things like, and I talk about this in my video I do about cults, where one of the things cults do that I recognize in what Teal Swan does is they'll start off with your run-of-the-mill, average, often psychology exercises that give people a quick win that they will then associate with whatever the group is. They'll be like, oh my gosh, they gave me this exercise that I didn't know existed. They helped me. That attachment is connected because that positive reinforcement has happened. When you could find these exercises just about anywhere, you just came upon it here first. And what happens is they take all of this information, the stuff that works, and they slowly start integrating their own practices. Now, this in and of itself is not unusual to even, business practices. But what happens with cults is that slowly but surely you lose the good stuff and you're left with just their stuff. As where the better business practices, the better tribe practices is that they always stay infused. You're never just introduced to one and then left with the other. You're introduced them as a mix to begin with, and they stay a mix. And cults do this so that you start feeling good before you start being introduced to the questionable practices, so that you don't question it until you're left with just the questionable practices. And as far as I can tell, this appears to be happening with the way people are introduced to and then pulled into Teal Swan's deepest work. So the next one I want to talk about is really just quickly touch on this because it's a controversy that they talk about in the deep end. Is she responsible for other people's suicides? Well, I don't want to directly speculate on that. But what I do want to ask is the question, is it responsible when you have people around you telling you that what you're doing is dangerous? Is it responsible for you to continue doing those things? Would it not be the more responsible thing to do to find other practices, other ways that are at least less likely to hurt somebody? Especially because, and this is part of my main concern, is that when it comes to her innermost practices, the ones that you're only going to find at her in-person retreats, they seem to be doing more harm than helping. And that's, from my perspective, what makes these practices irresponsible. And so when you have this being reflected at you, is it responsible to continue doing them? And not only does she continue doing them, but she digs her heels in and says, no, this is what I'm doing. And it doesn't seem to even cross her mind. And I've done a lot of research. I've not just watched the deep end. I've watched the Gizmodo podcast. I've watched Open Shadow and all sorts of other things where I'm not just getting information from places Teal Swan isn't happy with, but getting information from places that she promotes. I've run the gambit of all the different ends and angles of this. And this is still the conclusion I've come to when I used to be a Teal Swan fan. Like, not like a Tealer, not a Teal tribe, like deepest member, but I was really rooting for her. There was a period of time where I would have said that I wanted to be the blonde Teal Swan. And now it really concerns me, some of the deeper practices, especially when you start to know where they came from. And especially when you start to understand that even she admits that she's targeting people. She's targeting a specific kind of people. And I'm not saying she said this, but what I'm saying about those people is that they're vulnerable people who are highly influenceable because of their vulnerability. And that concerns me. The last thing that I want to get into before I get into my main concern is this idea that she survived not one, but 2 satanic cults and was a satanic cult abuse victim. Now, and I want to say this right from the beginning, I'm not saying that she didn't experience any sort of abuse. I'm not arguing that. I wouldn't even begin to speculate. I don't know. But there does appear to be some obvious contradictions in her stories where those storylines or plot points in the story of her life should be staying consistent. And I've watched all of the interviews, and over time, there are ways in which her story changes. There are ways in which points change that don't seem like they should have changed. When people are telling the truth, they do change up the way they tell a story. but not the points of the story, not the details of the story. That is what stays consistent. And to be fair, also, when someone is lying, they tell the exact same story, the exact same way, because it's rehearsed. So you do, when you're looking for if someone's telling the truth, want to look for, how things are changing. And it's just my problem with her stories. And again, I'm not saying she didn't experience any abuse, but I have a problem with the stories that she tells because there are inconsistencies that just, to me, from all of the behavioral sciences that I've studied, shouldn't be changing. This leads me into my main concern. And to tie these together, based on everything I've researched, Teal Swan got her practices of working with repressed memories from a woman named Barbra Smow. Barbra Smow was a counselor or a therapist who, I can't remember what her specific title was, but she did some sort of therapy or counseling. She was at the height of the Satanic Panic controversy that happened in Utah when there were a handful of therapists trying to say that when you experience really, really intense trauma, you repress the memories so much that you don't remember them at all. And the first thing that really draws my attention to this is the fact that supposedly this has been refuted. Supposedly, since this happened, the idea of repressed memories being a thing has been scientifically tested out of being a possible thing. And not only that, but from my experience of not only working with people, but I had a teacher who was in one of the notorious religious sex cults of our time. And there is no amount of forgetting the memories. Those really, really traumatic memories are the ones that get held on to. They're the ones that create the trauma story. They're the ones that create the triggers. They're not forgotten. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier was one of the things that really stood out to me was the fact that when I was listening to Teal Swan tell her story on the news about her surviving these satanic cults, one of the key things that stood out to me that was also in the deep end was Teal Swan talks about how there were these barbecue pits that they were putting children on that were lit on. They had dug barbecue pits that they had put children on. And Teal Swan's assistant says that happened to her. The assistant says it happened to the assistant. And that really shocked me to see that in this one interview, Teal Swan saying that she in a satanic cult practice saw people putting kids on barbecue pits, and then the assistant is saying that happened to her and her family. Now, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I'm saying that I find it concerning that when there seems to be these more obvious ways in which things are being projected from Teal Swan onto her people, that might not be another one. So, Teal Swan does what she calls channeling. And we see in the deep end that she is taking people who have never done channeling before and having them do channeling for other people. And the risk that this runs of the person who's not experienced projecting things onto the person they're doing it for, who is a vulnerable person, whether they're doing it as a therapy or as a practice because they're learning to be able to teach it themselves, this seems questionable to me. You know, you see in the deep end how she has Juliana do the channeling. And you also see in the deep end how she has these people that she's teaching to be completion process certified counselors. She's having them sit in a room, and you literally hear this person say, when I was being your dad or when I was being your mom, it felt like to me that your brother was being inappropriately touched. And from what I could tell, that didn't seem to be something that this girl who was getting channeled for even remotely suggested was a possibility before. So where is this coming from? We have to be asking these questions, especially when we're dealing with deep trauma that we're healing within us. My favorite teachers, all of them, when it comes to teaching others how to work with people in their trauma, they all say, leave it in the client's court. Don't let them walk away feeling like they have to go talk to anybody else. Now, that's not to say that they can't go talk to anybody else. That's not to say that they can't go work things out with somebody if they feel like they can. But the aspect of forgiveness and compassion is deeply rooted in psychological practices, and that seems to be missing from Teal Swan's practices. And that really concerns me, because she has all these people who might have not actually been abused in the ways that other people are suggesting that they might have been, because it must just be a repressed memory that you don't know, but I am channeling it from the ethers. And these people are walking away, detaching from their closest tribe members, whether they're biological family or soul family, married family, whatever. It concerns me that this is happening, because again, it's something that goes back to that cult-like behavior of anyone you bring into your circle, distancing them from the people they have around them. Now, that's not to say that in situations where someone has experienced trauma that they are expressing, that they shouldn't distance themselves from people who actually abused them. But that's not what appears to be going on here. And that's what really concerns me. There is a noise going on in the background. I don't know if you guys can hear it. And I don't want to cut this. So the question I asked at the end of my first video that I feel is really relevant here is, should we fault our teachers, our spiritual teachers especially, for being human? And of course not. That's some of the things that I like most about Wayne Dyer are the moments where he says, look, I have these ego things I do, but he also has that humble nature about him where he says, but these are the things I'm doing to work to the spiritual levels of consciousness and out of these ego moments. Recognizing the ego within him. And so what I feel like really needs to be asked about anyone that you're working with when it comes to your mental health especially, is what kind of person do you want to be entrusting your mental health with? And really make an informed decision about that. Because if you're not, that is how people find themselves in cults like Nixium, in tribes like Teals, in places like Scientology, where they find themselves walking away. And there are people, I'm not just speculating this about Teal's tribe, there are people who have actively walked out of Teal's tribe saying, this hurt me more than it helped me. So that's not a speculation. This is something that is happening. I'm not saying it's happening about everybody, but it is something that's happening. We need to do the research on the people that we are going to be entrusting our mental health with. It's a relationship like anything else. And we want to make sure that when we're on that healing journey, that we are going to people who are going to help us and not hurt us. I really believe that, you know, this is part of Teal's journey, working with Barbra Smow, and seeing how that's affected the rest of everything else. So, to end this, you know, again, I'm not saying that she doesn't have great teachings out there. I followed her for a long time, not knowing any of this. I followed her for a long time, thinking that because I could see how what she was sharing related to other people, that I trusted them. That was why, because she also offered things that worked that I had gotten from other people. That was why I trusted following her for so long, you know, following her in the superficial sense of just watching her lightly, loosely on the internet for so long without ever being able to get into any of this stuff. And it wasn't until I saw her response to the Deep End videos, which I think there were 2 of them out at the time, that I even knew the Deep End series existed. Had she not made those response videos, I to this day might still not know they existed. I might have not ever gone down this rabbit hole. But there are deeper teachings that she offers. There are things that are happening in the deepest circles of Teal's tribe that are concerning to me. And so I feel like they just need to be brought to people's attention, because if, you know, I very much believe in the concept of take what you need and leave the rest. So if you can do that with Teal, more power to you. I am not here to try to chase anyone away. And that is part of why I wanted to redo this in one video rather than 3 long-winded videos. Because we all just deserve a moment of informed decision-making, especially when it comes to our mental health. As a spiritual teacher, there are other spiritual teachers that offer these same things. As a mental health practitioner, there are other people that offer these same things. Even her completion process is your run-of-the-mill shamanic childhood trauma processing meditation. It's not unique to her. So, though she has added her little things to it, that's just the way business works. That's the way even spirituality works, is we all learn from our teachers and then add our little spin to it and then put it out into the world. She's no different. She's done the same thing. And there are all sorts of ways in which we can recognize that. So, yeah, that is, let me just look over my notes and make sure that I haven't forgotten anything. I was getting ready to make lunch, editing my video, and I wanted to make this point because I realized I had forgotten to do so in filming this. I have had personal experience with how video editing can be misleading, misused. I have seen how people can craft stories. And I want to make this point because this is her main complaint. How editing can be used to mislead people. I don't think that's what's going on here for this reason. I'm not just using the Deep End as a reference. I am using a lot of things that I've seen over the years as a reference for this, including things, like I said, that she is has promoted herself, not just the things that go against her, but the things that are for her. I've been seeing these things. So I wanted to make that point here at the end because I feel like it's an important point to make, because I feel like it's the one thing she feels people can't rebut. This is not just the deep end making these claims. This is it. And it's not just people who have some bone against her like she thinks it is. Like, I used to really like her, and then I discovered these things, and it really, like, I used to have this saying when I was little, when I was a teenager: I will not hate something, and I'm not saying I hate Teal Swan, unless I've done the research to back it up. Because if you're gonna stand up against something, you better have done the research to back it up. So I'm here to let you know. I know from personal experience. I have a friend who has a Vice, a part in a Vice documentary, and the way his story got twisted. Oh my goodness. It made me sad watching it, and I was grateful that I ended up not taking part in it, because I'm glad I didn't get interjected into what became that circus. Otherwise, it could have been my 15 minutes of fame. But that's not happening. That's not happening here. That's not what's going on. Yes, there are people who use Teal Swan as a way to get clout and get views and get followers. That's also part of why I wanted to take those down, because my original videos were partly fueled by my scarcity mindset. I don't want that to be any part of this whatsoever. I want to get out the parts that are coming from a pure intention, coming from a pure place of concern, and that's it. So, just wanted to add that here at the end. So when it comes to someone like Teal Swan, do you want to be entrusting your mental health to somebody who has been recorded exhibiting cult-like behaviors and practices? Do you want to be entrusting your mental health to someone who could possibly be lying about surviving abuse as their founding story, as what attracts people to her? Do you want to be entrusting your mental health to someone who has practices that have been shown to cause more harm than help? These are the questions I think we need to be asking when it comes to whether or not we should be consuming Teal Swan's content, and if she should really be entrusted with someone's mental health. Thank you guys for watching my video. As I've been saying lately, time is our greatest resource. It's the one thing we can't get back or make more of. So when you spend your time with me, I am truly grateful for it. As always, may the energies you serve you well. Let's keep making our way through, and I'll see you in the next one.